My name is Franca. I am your host. This is Francamente, the podcast. I'm so excited to be here with you. Thank you so much for listening. And without further ado, let's bias your football content. Hello. Welcome to another episode. We're at episode 11. We're doing so good. I am so excited every time we record. I love this. I really love making this podcast so much. I hope y'all love to hear it. The feedback's great. And we're just going to keep rolling along until we have 6 million episodes. Today I am Arsenal adjacent, as many of you know, and I'm wearing this sexy kit. If one thing is true about Arsenal, it's that they always have the sexiest kits. Like their kit game is so strong. If only that would translate, right? I mean, to skill on the pitch. Although this season, in honor of the sadness that was letting them, they let the Prem slip away from them, unfortunately. Like, I'm so sad for my boy Arteta. I'm so sad for all the players. I mean, they had it, right? I am a United fan, even though it doesn't seem like it right this second. But this kid is so sexy. I love a black on black moment. I love this little rose gold moment. It's just so nice. And so yeah, I love this kit. I'm getting through them. It's going to be a very long time before I repeat. So if you tune in just for the kits, you're in for a wild ride. It's going to be a very long time, but yeah, we're looking slick. I'm having a little space buns moment too here. It's a look. It's a whole look. It is a whole look. If you're not watching on YouTube, you are missing out on the look. Okay, so what are we talking about today? There's two main topics, and they both are from current events. And I mean, I would be remiss if I did not start with the racism in La Liga, right? Racism in La Liga. And it's interesting because one of the things that we're going to note is that while I am a Barcelona fan, okay, when it comes to these situations, there are no kit colors, right? You have to, this can't, what I've seen and what I really don't condone is turning this racism situation into this team versus that team, and look at this and they're that, and we're so much better and we're holier than thou. That cannot fly. Okay, because La Liga as a whole is a microcosm of Spanish society, Spanish meaning Spain, right? And so we're not going to play the game that because it happened to be Valencia fans this time that did it. And, because people will say like, oh, because he shouldn't play in Real Madrid. Like, it's true. No one should play in Real Madrid because they're fascist as fuck. But the reality is that the racism that Black players have faced in La Liga is not new. It's not unique to one team or one player, okay? And it is abhorrent that what I'm still seeing when cases like this happen. And by the way, if you're listening to this, you know what I'm talking about. But we're talking about Vinicius facing racist abuse at the Valencia match. Now, we might as well be talking about any moment in La Liga history, because this has happened with throwing bananas on the field. This has happened with the monkey chants, or calling people monkeys, or other worse words. And what we're not gonna do is chalk it up to the rivalry thing, or chalk it up to the passion thing, or anything like that. Because guess what? A lot of us are passionate. I don't think there's anyone that is described more often as passionate than me. Okay. And I can be passionate without being racist, homophobic, sexist, etc. It's not an excuse. I also can't, and now this is where I'm going to pull out my credentials, okay, as a PhD, as an educator, as a diversity, equity, inclusion consultant and practitioner, okay? We're not, my ancestors are all Spaniards and Italian, and I was born in Uruguay and Argentina. What we're not gonna do is use culture as an excuse, because that's another one I've seen. And they're like, oh, they don't understand our culture. Like, no one understands Spanish culture than myself. Okay. More than myself. And I'm here to tell you, it is not an excuse. First of all, for you to use culture as an excuse for racism, you should be ashamed of yourself in every way. That's not something to be proud of. That's not something to say as like, oh my gosh, like it's just this quirky thing we do. We're racist. Like, yeah, you are a country of colonizers. You are a country that's founded on colonization and slavery and the fucking crusades and Catholic bullshit. And then you had the worst fucking fascist in Europe because we didn't have the luxury of Francisco Franco dying immediately. Okay. He ruled for years. So the fascism that's still alive and well in Spain is very well documented. And it is a genetic thing at this point. So what we're not going to do is pretend that saying that racism is a part of the culture is an excuse, is a way to say like, oh my gosh, they're just being their quirky selves. Okay. If that is a part of your culture, if that is a part of your, your personality, and if you can't go to a football game without being racist, you're telling on yourself and you should get help. And I would say worse things if this weren't recorded that you should do. Okay. So stop that. There is no excuse. And I don't want to have to come on here and defend a player that plays for Real Madrid. Trust me, it's the last thing I want to do is defend fucking Vinicius, because I always say it like that because there's a meme in Argentina about how I can't even explain this verbally because it's so ridiculous. It's the SpongeBob like making fun of someone meme, and it's like the uppercase, lowercase letters thing. And in Spanish, that translates to adding eyes everywhere. So you're like, like that, right? So I always say Vinicius. I'm always like, Vinicius. I don't know why. I just see it as that meme. I don't know why I just said all that, but like, this is why you tune in. Okay. My space buttons, one is like wobbly. But don't make me come on here and defend a fucking Real Madrid player. Why are you doing this to me? Literally, like, I can't with y'all. And one thing about Vinicius is that this is not the first time he has faced this racism, and this is not the first time he has called it out. So that boy is a real one, okay? Because there's many people who sit idly by. I mean, people who are the victims of the racism don't have an obligation to speak out, right? But there's people who sit idly by and watch their teammates face this racist abuse and never say shit. And that we have to commend Vinicius for being outspoken always. And this is why he's hated, because some of the worst figures in Spanish media, in Spanish football media, some of the worst figures, and even like the president of the liga, like so many people came out to be like, oh, he's a troublemaker. He's this, he's that. Does that ring a bell? He's the angry black man. Is that really the trope? Is that really the defense you're going to use for to excuse the racism in your league that you refuse to do something about? And by the way, I also want, I really got into this, like, I got heated quick today. By the way, okay, we've got smoke for everyone. Let us not pretend that this is specific to La Liga. If you're a Premier League fan and you're doing the holier than thou, oh my God, that league is so racist. Ours is so pure and great and not. Fuck off. Because this is a global problem. It happens all of the time, and people use the same excuses over and over again, and no one does shit about it. Do we remember in 2020 when every league was playing the little game, the superficial, yeah, we're like Black Lives Matter, like no racism, no room for racism, and all that fucking bullshit? That is the definition of the corporatization of anti-racism or any social justice movement for capitalist purposes. They sold jerseys. They sold merch. They sold images of players kneeling. Okay. And then what the fuck has changed since? Because we're 3 years out. Literally nothing. So let's not pretend that if you're a Premier League fan, if you're any other league in the world, like, they're all racist. Why do we continue to allow it? This speaks to what I was talking about in one of the prior episodes where I was like, we're all fucking hypocrites, right? Because the reality is that we should boycott the whole shit until they get it together. Right. And when we're still seeing the same excuses coming out again and again, and it's constantly like, but this, and it's the culture, and you don't understand, it has to stop. You have to draw the line. And we also have to look at, while intent doesn't matter, obviously, right? Intent versus impact is important to look at. Like, intent does not matter, right? It's the impact. And while sometimes the defense of certain words in Spanish is fair to say that, yes, the word, there's words that are used differently and they don't have the same context. That's true. But you can't tell me, okay, when it's an opposing team's fans screaming these words, which have no excuse, in my opinion, to their opposing team player in an insulting way, there is no other context under which that is acceptable. Like, there's no other way to take it than racist abuse. And I am so proud of Vinicius for standing up for himself and for everyone. And the stuff he has said is really amazing. Like talking about this, like just as a social justice movement. He talked about Brazil. He talked about Spain, what it is like to live in Spain. Because I think the most brilliant thing, because what a lot of people will also do, a lot of elitists and people who are like anti-football, anti-sports or whatever, will come out and be like, see, like they're so barbaric when they play that sport. Sir, what Vinicius said was spot on, because he took it beyond La Liga and he called Spain a racist country, and it for sure 1000% is. And that's where we need to make that connection. Football, maybe that's the tying thread here between the two things I'm going to talk about today that didn't have a tying thread although it all ties together. Okay. Football is not just football. Football is not a separate thing from society, especially not in countries which is every country where it's the number one sport, but where it's so important, like Spain, like England, like all of Latin America, like Africa, like a lot of continents, right? Most of the countries in the world have this as their main sport. So especially in Spain, where La Liga is La Liga, we're not going to detach it, okay? And also talk about it like, oh, it's just those barbaric sports fans being, themselves. We're not doing that today. We need to, this is why when this happens and when someone like Vinicius, and thank goodness, because there was a time where a player speaking out like this would have even faced a fine. And there were people calling for this, right? Because it's like, oh, he's a troublemaker, he's this, he's that. It is unfathomable to be consistently faced with racist abuse and then get in trouble for calling it out. And the racists don't face any consequences at all. Okay, so I think that one good thing that can and has come out of this is that we are seeing a lot more praise, obviously, from normal folks. Like, fascists are still coming for him, and racists are still coming for him, but a lot of folks are starting to realize why we speak out. Right? There was a time not too long ago that speaking out about racism was seen as like too radical. It still kind of is in some spaces, but now what Vinicius has done is he has normalized it a little bit so that maybe the next time it happens to someone else in a different league, they won't be afraid to speak out. Now, it would be ideal if we could get to the point where the racist abuse just stops, right? Because what are we doing here? What are we doing here? It's also been beautiful to see lots of support coming from other, La Liga fan bases, coming out with banners, or there were teams that came out with, shirts in support of Vinicius and like anti-racism. And like, I think that's beautiful. And I think that many of those moments were organic. They came either from fan bases, they were grassroots, or from the players themselves. It wasn't imposed by La Liga. Because the thing is, a lot of what's imposed by these leagues is also just bullshit, right? We've got these, again, these like corporate messages and these things that were like, is this really serious? Because what are you actually doing to prevent it from happening again? Are those fans going to be banned for life? You know, like how much of a zero tolerance policy really do you have when this keeps happening, right? So it's really disheartening that we're still having this conversation, that we're still having to have this conversation because this shit keeps happening. And what are we all doing about it? Wait, like, does, you know, at what point does it spark in us, the audience, you know, football fans, etc., and enough is enough attitude? At what point do we stop just being like little fanboys and girls and theys, to really look at this critically, right? We need to look at this critically. There's so many people, and I saw this a lot in 2020, and like I'm hoping that it's either that, I mean, it's one of two things. It's that I have removed enough people from my life that my circle now looks like an echo chamber, which I'm okay with, right? I'm okay with, but because I don't need to see, you know, bullshit in my life. Or are we starting to see a shift from considering people who call this stuff out too radical and too controversial, right? I hate that word. To being like, no, this is the norm. This is the norm, and this is mainstream, and we're going to talk about it, and we're going to talk about it every time it happens. Okay, so Vinicius, like, all power to you for doing what you do. Despite the fact that he plays for Madrid, you have to, like, you can't downplay the importance of this young man refusing to shut up. It's a tale as old as time. Racists have been around forever, and they're loud, and these fascist movements around the world are giving them more voices. Okay, and it's up to us, because we keep, you know, what we see a lot of is like, oh, this has to stop, this has to change, this has to whatever. But like that, we have to stop it, right? We have to change it. We can expect La Liga or teams or federations or whatever to do what they're going to do. But at what point do we all stand up to make sure it changes and doesn't happen again? Right? Because it is on us. It's totally on us to continue to call it out and to refuse to accept it, right? There's different ways. There's different ways to organize, to boycott, to, you know, whatever the case may be, to really draw attention to it. So it's not a new problem. It is not an isolated incident, okay? It is inherent to Spanish in Spain. And I say that because there's a lot of confusion about, you know, terminology sometimes, to Spaniards' culture, okay? It is inherent. It is a country founded on colonization. They are colonizers, okay? It is ingrained in them to be racist. And I am a Spaniard, okay, by blood. So don't come for me, okay? Spaniards are so racist, and they refuse to acknowledge or accept it. And until that happens, we're not going to get anywhere. So it's up to us to push that. Let's not just leave it at letting Vinicius say his thing. You know, a lot of this goes back to other stuff I've said before, where, and I even had one of the clips, I think, from the last episode, was like, share my shit. Okay, because private support or calling me brave doesn't do shit for me if I'm still out there like an island of crazy, right? Radical or whatever. Don't just praise Vinicius. Call it out the next time it happens. Stand with him. Be the one that doesn't put the emotional labor on the harmed person to come out and say what needs to be said. If he wants to speak, that's awesome. But like, let's all take a look at our lives and see where this racist abuse may be happening in our workplaces, in our schools, in our social media spaces, and what could we do to say and do more so that the labor doesn't always fall on the marginalized person. I think that's the lesson here. We can talk about this to death, but the reality is, what do we do going forward besides feel bad, share sympathy, empathy, and whatever? Like, what do we do to make sure this really fucking just ends at the root? And I think part of that includes everyone being a little more bold, right? Everyone standing up, especially the more privilege you have, the more responsibility you have to say something when it happens, especially if you're not part of that harmed group. It's on you. It's time to stop saying, oh, someone should do something about this, because someone is you. Because now those of us that are doing this work are always like, oh my gosh, she's that, she's this, and like, you know, and he's like too radical, and he's the angry black man, and she's this and she's that. Like, that's not going to get us anywhere unless everyone hops on board. So I think the lesson here is universal, right? It's universal. It is not about Real Madrid. It's not about Valencia, and it's not about racist fans in La Liga, and it's not about La Liga, and it's not about Spain. It's about, what are we all doing to actually stop this, right? If you're not doing enough, it's not too late to start now. I'll catch you after the break.
Hey, make sure to follow and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. And help us out by leaving a rating and review, and remember to share it with a friend. Don't forget to follow Franca on Twitter and Instagram at Francamente for the latest news. And lastly, please visit realfrancamente.com for bonus content, including articles, photos, and for more information about the podcast.
We are back. We are back. And while the next topic at first glance may not seem like it's related, it absolutely is related, because all of this is a problem of fascism, and it's inherent to fascism and capitalism, which was created just to spread white supremacy, right? That's well documented. And so in the second half, I want to talk about a day that just happened, which is May 20th, and in Uruguay, that is the Day of Memory, El Día de la Memoria, and that day commemorates all of the lives lost during the dictatorship, the desaparecidos, the disappeared folks, from the horrific CIA ordered and backed Operation Condor dictatorship, which took thousands and thousands of lives across Latin America, everywhere, but specifically in Uruguay. It's celebrated on May 20th with what is called La Marcha del Silencio, a march of silence, right? And this is a phenomenon that's been studied worldwide and emulated worldwide, because while I believe in violent riots and Molotov cocktails personally, some folks love to talk about peaceful protest, right? Which for me is always kind of a red flag. When people talk about peaceful protest, I always kind of like, my antenna go up, like, oh, like what is your vibe? What are you gonna? It's like one of those things that's, you know, like the meme that's like, what's one thing that's not racist but it feels racist, right? Saying peaceful protest is one for me. But with that said, I think one of the most effective manifestations of peaceful protest I've ever seen and heard of is the March of Silence, La Marcha del Silencio in Uruguay. And it is so breathtaking. It's so impactful, right? To see, because when you see these images, and then I've shared some because there is an overlap with football, which is where I'm getting to in this segment. Okay. I've shared some if you follow me on socials, like seeing the street filled with people holding up pictures of disappeared folks. Sometimes it's their kin. Sometimes it's just like, you know, someone who doesn't have kin that takes someone's picture with them. And so it's people just marching slowly through the streets with these pictures and not saying a word, just in unison. It is eerie. to see a manifestation, and it's so well organized with that many people where they just march in silence, and it's the silence in honor of the folks that disappeared, right? They don't have a voice. And so it's really incredible how much of an impact silence can have in a space where what's expected is a lot of noise and rambunctious, right? Which is also, by the way, I'm going to keep saying it, I also condone. I condone it when it's riots. I condone it when, when it's violent, because the bigger violence that people are rioting against, to me, is more serious than some folks setting some shit on fire. I don't whatever. But again, with that said, because of this connection to football, to racism, to fascism, to imperialism, and all of that fun stuff, it's worth noting that it is a really effective form of protest. It happens every single year for the last, I think, 28 years. And it always has kind of a theme, and it's always like around memory, and, social memory, not just personal memory, like the memory of a nation, right? Because what happens as we are headed towards this fascistification of the world, because these fascists aren't just popping up in one or two places, it's a global phenomenon anymore, right? We're seeing less and less people remembering that this happened when it's convenient, and less, governments actually like putting in any actionable laws to like prosecute the people involved and all of that stuff. So it's really up to these groups that start that are like grassroots, like people-centered groups at the heart of it, right? Starting these things and keeping them alive. So I should have worn my Todos Somos Familiares t-shirt. I do have one. But what made me so it's really important to note that in Uruguay, where football is a religion, where football is a god, and we a couple episodes had our Galeano episode, which we'll have another one soon. To Galeano, like, football is the religion, right? It's the religion of the masses. It moves people. It is something that reaches people like nothing else does in society. In a country like that, you can't separate football from these social justice movements just naturally. Like, teams got involved in this march. They posted, they did different things. Peñarol, had a whole like march of their own, basically, like at their stadium. Like, it is inherently connected. And this is where I want to also note that difference, right, between like Uruguay and Europe, where it is or the US, obviously, like imperialist, colonialist countries would see that as like a PR nightmare. Oh my God, that's too controversial. Why would we like march? Why would we like advertise that? Well, because it's the right thing to do. And PR as a thing is bullshit. And it always benefits the oppressor. And like many people in Uruguay know that, and like teams and everything know that, and they don't care. It's not that they are perfect, on this front. But I think it's worth noting the difference between like us talking about this and like maybe if we're in an imperialist country, we're like, oh my God, that's so bold. It is bold, but it also is like the bare minimum, and like no one expects otherwise, right? Like in the US and everywhere in Europe, look at how long it took to actually even be able to say Black Lives Matter. Then once it did, it like was a whole thing that became about all lives matter. Like, it's always about corporate, right? Corporatization. In Uruguay, it's very, very different. And so this article came out in La Diaria, which is one of the best publications, like for news. It's one of the best news publications in Uruguay and so again, in these days where it was the day before the march that it came out, where everything centered in leftist spaces, especially around the march of silence, around the disappeared folks, around doing all this memory work, the day before this article comes out to link football to the march by highlighting the lives of disappeared folks who had connections to football. And I think that's beautiful. This article is called Un lugar vacío en la tribuna, historias de detenidos, desaparecidos y su relación con el fútbol, right? So, and it evokes a beautiful image, right? An empty space in the crowd, like an empty seat. Stories of the disappeared and detained and their relationship to football. And it is a long form article. And so the folks that are mentioned, and it's typical. So part of the March of Silence, when it starts, they read the names of every single person, of every single disappeared person that they have records for. They're very, very clear to say, to include like, oh, for everyone who unofficially, right? Because it's not just the record people. There were many, many more disappeared folks, but we don't have the official, paperwork or whatever. So they read everyone, and then after every single one, everyone responds presente, right? And so these are the names of the folks that are in this article. Manuel Liberov, presente. Adalberto Soba, presente. Luis Eduardo Arigón, presente. Alberto Pocho Mechoso, presente. León Duarte, presente. Fernando Miranda, presente, y Luis Eduardo González, presente, right? And that's how they do. They go through every single name, and they say it's like common to say presente as like a resistance thing, like they're gone but not forgotten kind of thing, in a non-imperialist way, obviously the farthest thing from it. And so it starts out by talking about how they lived these lives like everyone else. They would go to the different places, they would go to the movies, to the to the open air markets, they would go dancing, they would fall in love, they would go to a concert, and they would go watch football and scream for goals just like everyone else. And so I think that's something that's so unique to a country like Uruguay, where like football is so intricately connected to these moments of that we could call politics or social justice, or or like these serious like historical moments. You can't separate football from it, because football is a social phenomenon. It's a popular culture phenomenon that in a country like Uruguay is not, it's almost like a social myth, not a myth in the sense of like a myth that's false, right? Like we're talking about mitos, like the things that make a country's like identity, right? A nation's identity. And there is a brilliant academic who was actually on my dissertation committee, Milita Alfaro, and her main thing is Carnaval, which is what my dissertation was on. But she also talks about football, and one of her most brilliant quotes that I've used in many, many presentations I've done throughout the world is that in a country like Uruguay, where indigenous populations were all but wiped out and everything's whitewashed and their history is so removed, society had to create their own mythical history and like social oral history that like would normally belong to indigenous folks. And in a country like that, things like Carnival, things like football, things like mate, right? Mate, things like tango, okay? They become so culturally important that it goes beyond a popular culture moment, which is why sometimes folks who are United Station don't understand me when I have these discussions, or when I'm like, I have a football podcast, but it's really about this, and this. And people are like, what? Like, how? Like, can you just watch the sport? Shut up. No, I cannot. I mean, no one says that to my face, and I'm sure people say it behind my back, but like, I cannot. But what people do say to my face when I'm like analyzing stuff is like, can you ever turn it off? No, I cannot. I apologize. Like, you can find 6,000 million other podcasts where you'll get your little analysis and your little, bullshit, fluffy shit. This is not the one, and that's okay. You don't like it? Skip it. Go to the next one. I do not care. But no, I cannot turn it off, because this is what it's about. When we're talking about this march of silence for the disappeared folks, okay, which is, by the way, my personal history. Listen to my episode on Argentina 1984, okay? And you can't separate that from football. How am I going to live in the imperialist hub of the world, okay, and not call this shit out every chance I get? It's my duty. If you don't like it, that's a you problem. And that shows precisely what you are willing to accept in your life, what you're willing to be complicit in. Okay. I will call myself out for being a hypocrite because I watch the shit. All right. But I will make sure you know it. I will make sure you know how complicit you are and how complicit we all are. Okay, this article is heartbreaking. And it's really beautifully written. Intellectual Uruguayans tend to have like uh a really uncanny ability, and this is also Galliano, to write these, like, this is a news piece. It's like it's a newspaper, right? Like in such a lyrical way that it almost reads like a story, like a short story, like a piece of literature. And it's just so beautiful the way they paint us these pictures, right? It talks about how, why the 20th of May is the day that is, used to commemorate all this, after the very famous assassinations of Selman Michelini, among a couple other folks. And then they talk about how these, like how these specific disappeared folks that are being talked about in this article came to be football fans. And usually it's connected to the dad, right? Or a parent. And it's so beautiful and moving, and uninhibited. Like, people don't, what I love about Uruguay is many things, and this is also true of Argentina to an extent, and many other countries to an extent, but in Uruguay, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's because it's so tiny or what it is in the genes of Uruguayans, that it's like a lot more common for folks to want to consume this content. If the content was just about analysis or just about whatever, like this, like they would not like it as much. Like, folks want this content infused in their sports content, and they're this and they're that. So I think that's beautiful. And the way that this article is written to just make you feel like you're there. Like this is your kin. And in a way it really is, right? Because it's really interesting. A lot of the footage I watched with my parents who lived through it, and like, it's almost impossible to get through without getting emotional, right? Because those are the people, because when you survive something like that, you have survivor's guilt. Those are the people that could have been you. And why were you saved, right? And when, there's a lot of survivor's guilt that comes with that. So there's, around the 20th of May, there's a lot of really great discourse, and there's also a lot of really emotional moments, right? And so, like, for this piece to have come out to just tie football in just shows the importance of football. It shows the importance of why Vinicius calling out racism is not just whatever people want to say it is. It's not just about La Liga. It's not just about whatever. Like, I hope that the one thing that y'all remember me for, that y'all like know me for, is for making these connections so deeply, to tie in why imperialism is so bad, why I talk about capitalism constantly, why I talk about colonialism constantly, because this is the shit it caused. This is the shit you're complicit in, okay, when you defend capitalism, when you defend the United States, when you defend the piece of cloth of a flag that people love to be sexually attracted to in this country, when you defend, anything, right? Like, that has to do with imperialism. This is the shit. This is why I can't stand that, like, arrogance, right? Because this is what you're complicit in, causing all of this, destruction around the world, and then claiming it's in the name of freedom or whatever the fuck else. Like, it can't stand. It can't stand. It is 1,000% connected to the racism, because it's the same thing. It's rooted in the fascism. It's rooted in exclusion. The KKK, okay? The KKK literally initially, in their like their ads, I don't know what the fuck, like, when they would put out, like, like signage, it would be about Black folks and communists. By the way, like, fascism, the exact opposite of fascism is communism. It's the only thing that's ever attempted to make a dent in fascism is communism, right? And so my point here is, the reason why these folks were persecuted in Uruguay was any sort of suspicion of communist, ties, and racism is the fight against racism is 1,000% tied to that as well. Like literally the KKK would be like communists and black folks and, you know, and brown folks and Jews, like were their targets. It is all connected and none of this is new. None of this is new, and we need y'all to get on board, especially if you're telling on yourself by acting like this is new. Okay, get with the program because we've been doing this since colonization. Okay, but none of it's new, none of it's isolated, and we need to talk about the intersectionality of all of these issues being related to one thing, which is imperialism and capitalism. I think that's a mic drop moment. I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you liked it. This has been Real Francamente, the podcast. My name is Franca. I'm your host. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Real Francamente on both. Check out our website, www.realfrancamente.com. You can find lots of content there or contact us directly with questions or comments. All the links and ats will be in the show notes if you need them or want them. And for the ease of not having to spell anything yourself, please subscribe to the pod on your favorite platform and maybe leave us a rating and a review, but only if you like it, and share with your friends. Don't forget to buy us your football content. Gracias y chao.